If you're a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility and your machinery isn't working right, Grainger knows you need to understand what's wrong as soon as possible. So when a conveyor motor falters, Grainger offers diagnostic tools like calibration kits and multimeters to help you identify and fix the problem. With Grainger, you can be confident you have everything you need to keep your facility running smoothly. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
DSW, birthplace of the humble brag. Here, the shoes are so good, no one would ever know how little you paid. If you didn't go telling everyone, that is. And with never-ending options for every style, mood, and occasion, all at really great prices, we'll definitely give you something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands. Or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget at DSW stores or DSW.com.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
And what's going on, Los Angeles, Bruin Nation, LAFB fam? The Madman back with you for all of your UCLA football needs, and really excited to jump into it this week. Obviously, we have, as a football program, 11 days until the end of the regular season. We knew it was going to be a very difficult game against Ohio State, and I thought the team played very valiantly against an Ohio State team that maybe didn't quite have their fastball. Unfortunately, 48-10 defeat at the hands of the defending national champions in the Horseshoe, bringing the Bruins to 3-7 and 3-4 overall. And of course, the 3-7 record now ensures that this team will not be bowl eligible in the 2025 season. So we have the home game here against Washington, which could potentially be the last game that the Bruins play in the regular season in the Rose Bowl. A shocking sentence that I can't even believe I'm saying. And then the finale, the Victory Bell game across town in the Coliseum against the rival USC Trojans. So season's going to end November 29th in about 11 or 12 days from the time of this recording. And so as a result of that, you want to be able to put your best foot forward. You want to be able to put this season strong and finish it strong, given how much these players and these coaches have been through. But now the conversation shifts to, who is this new UCLA football coach going to be? And I think a couple of things have happened here in the last 24 hours. And as they say, where there's smoke, there's usually fire, and want to get all into it in terms of the future direction of this program. I think topic number one is, given now that the Bruins have lost 3 in a row, and given the fact that Tim Skipper and this staff is 3-4, we had said that he needed to potentially go 6-3 and get this team to bowl eligibility to really be in a position to potentially take this job. Now, unfortunately, that Nebraska loss in particular, combined with the 2 losses to Indiana and Ohio State, which you knew were unattainable games, and that opener against Northwestern, I think at this stage, short of an emphatic performance against Washington, followed up by, I think, an epic upset against USC, short of 2 really remarkable performances against Washington and USC, hard to believe that Tim Skipper and this staff are going to come back next year. But I think Skipper, Coyle, Jerry have done such a phenomenal job in terms of galvanizing this team. They're starting to run out of gas a little bit, but let's hope they can put it together these last 2 weeks. Washington is a very dynamic team with Damon Williams at quarterback. He had nearly 500 total yards of offense earlier this season against Rutgers. He's going to be an absolute handful as a dual threat quarterback, both throwing as well as running the ball, and really going to test this UCLA front seven. as the plays get unscripted. So Will and I are going to talk much more about that later this week. And then obviously the big one, the Victory Bell game. SC sitting at 8-2 right now. They got a huge game this week at Eugene, Oregon, where it's potentially a play-in for the playoff. And so there's going to be two wildly different versions of USC potentially in 11 days. A team that's 9-2, and all they need to do is win that final regular season game to make an at-large spot in the college football playoff, or a team that's going to be coming off a loss to Oregon, knowing that they've missed the college football playoff, knowing that they're firmly in a mid-tier bowl game, and then you wonder where their disposition, their mentality, their emotional level, their motivation is. So lots more to unpack about those two final games, but it is looking very likely at this stage that UCLA is going to be moving outward with a new head coach. And the excitement and the buzz right now, Rick Neuheisel, our beloved Bruin legend, Rick Neuheisel, former coach, dad of Jerry, of course, dropped a bit of a bomb on CBS about 24 hours ago where he said, and quote, "I'm hearing Bob Chesney's name at UCLA. He's going to have a decision to make." And so the natural question is, who the heck is Bob Chesney? And, well, upon sort of all of, I'm sure, the fans' Google searches and Wikipedia searches and ESPN and CBS searches, we've discovered that Bob Chesney is currently the head football coach at James Madison and leading that James Madison program over the last two seasons to an 18-5 record. Prior to that, Chesney was at Holy Cross for 6 years, 44-21 overall, with a staggering record and 5 consecutive first-place finishes in the Patriot League. And prior to that, some smaller jobs with a ton of head coaching success. And Chesney's originally a Pennsylvania native. And so why is this significant? In so many ways, I think this would potentially be an absolute home run hire for UCLA for a few reasons. Number one, this is the Curt Cignetti model that Indiana deployed just 20 months ago. And if you recall, Curt Cignetti was the prior coach of James Madison before Chesney took over for Cignetti. Cignetti went 52-9 at James Madison, put an alarming amount of success together. Prior to that, Cignetti was the head football coach at Elon. And then before that, he was a coordinator at Nick Saban coaching tree, a number of big jobs as a coordinator. And so we've seen Indiana basically take over the college football world here these last 20 months as being the preeminent storyline. Cignetti brought a winning mentality, a mindset, a guy who's come up the ranks and done things really the right way when you think about sort of building a resume. And when you think about the history of Indiana football, the previous 80 years, and now what they've done in just the last 20 months, this is a blueprint now, particularly in this new era of NIL and transfer portal, where you have to start thinking outside the box. And if Chesney was good enough to be able to take over for Cignetti and maintain an 18-5 record, James Madison is doing exceptionally well this year, sitting at 9-1 with aspirations for a division, a division championship in the division that they reside. It's going to be very challenging to see how Chesney really thinks about UCLA moving forward, because if you think about UCLA's history and Indiana's history in the last 40, 50, 60 years, UCLA has accomplished so much more in football than Indiana has. And the fact that Cignetti was able to come to Indiana and have the enormity of success so quickly, this is now a model that can be replicated. And the beauty of what Indiana was able to do is, because Cignetti was such an interesting personality with a lot of success, a chip on his shoulder, it really galvanized the fundraisers and the boosters of Indiana, notably a one Mark Cuban. And it's really been Mark Cuban's upping of investment, reinvestment, and passion into Indiana sports that has allowed the money to flow into Indiana. And now with a great coach like Curt Cignetti, it's been those two things that have enabled Indiana to sort of propel to success. And you're hoping that UCLA can follow that blueprint. that if Chesney is a galvanizing figure, now the Casey Wassermans can pull in other major boosters and donors to really rally around Chesney. So number one, it fits that Cignetti model, and we've seen it work right here. Number two, what I love about Chesney is he has had success as a head coach. And I think what we are starting to learn in both college football and pro football is the days of elevating a coordinator, a successful coordinator, to a big-time head coaching job, I think are over. And I think that you would rather have success as a head coach and a significant amount of head coaching experience at a smaller job and then go to a bigger job as a head coach, then be a coordinator at a quote-unquote big school and then become a head coach at a big school. And I think we're seeing that time and again with programs across the country, as well as kind of in the NFL, where you're seeing guys who were successful coordinators that did very well on one side of the ball, but now when they're head coaches, it's just a totally different skill set. And particularly in this new day and age of college football, you have to be a CEO. You have to be able to manage offensive scheme, defensive scheme, special team scheme. You have to be able to manage the roster from a strategic recruiting standpoint and a financial standpoint. You have to manage the boosters and the donors in terms of fundraising. There's just so much. You have to manage the media. You have to manage sponsors. There is just so much that goes into a college football program today. You need to be able to have all of those skill sets and really be multidimensional as a manager, as a leader, as an executive, as a visionary, as a CEO. Very, very different than being a single coordinator focused on one side of the ball and not necessarily needing to be the face of the program, and you can really go down and in. And the fact that Chesney has had success and been a really successful head coach for the better part of a decade at smaller schools, I think sets him up to really understand what this job entails, much like a Curt Cignetti. Cignetti was at James Madison for 5 years. He was at Elon for 2 years prior to that. He had nearly a decade of head coaching experience before he took that Indiana job. And so rather than going and finding the shiny new coordinator that could potentially be a head coach, go to someone that really understands the job, albeit at a less notable level, of course. But those skill sets of recruiting, of managing your offense, of managing your defense, of managing fundraisers, of managing sponsors, even if it's not at the same scale as it would be at a Power 4 job, the fact that you have exercised all of those muscles and have experience and stories and battle scars and successes across all of those muscles, I think is very, very significant. I think the third point that's really interesting here is Chesney can bring a significant amount of his roster from James Madison to UCLA potentially next year in the way that Cignetti brought so much of his roster at James Madison to Indiana. You're talking about 30-plus players that Cignetti brought from James Madison to be Hoosiers. And that is, I think, the type of influx of talent that UCLA is going to need in 2026 in particular. Will and I have talked about it so much that this is really a 2-year rebuild. When we sort of separated and parted ways from DeShaun Foster, we understood whatever we can do in the rest of 2025, let's really try and build the culture. Let's build the habits. Let's build the behaviors. But then 25 and 26 was going to be a slog. That was going to be the reality just from a talent standpoint. And now you're setting yourself up in terms of those building blocks to be really competitive in 2027. And I think that remains to be the case. Let's take a step back and understand the conference that UCLA is in right now, the Big Ten Conference. The Big Ten is built from the inside out. There's no question about that. And if you look at where UCLA's offensive line is right now and where UCLA's defensive line is, this is a total rebuild. When you look at who the starters are right now, when you look at who the primary pieces on this offensive line are, you see guys that really need to grow into their roles and guys that really need to elevate. And furthermore, you also see guys that are departing. Let's not forget Garrett DiGiorgio, Unije, Cortland Ford, all three of those guys are seniors. All three of those guys are essentially starters at this point and have been for the better part of the season. So as much as we are seeing an offensive line that needs a rebuild, think now about this offensive line minus those three guys next year. Flip it to the other side of the ball. Defensive line. We've talked about the struggles here, being able to generate a pass rush, being able to sort of hang in the trenches in the third and fourth quarter, staying fresh, staying physical against these more powerful teams. Think about who this defensive line loses this year as seniors. Gary Smith III, Keanu Williams, Jacob Busich, Apu, Keyshawn Bennett. That's 5 guys. Now, granted, their performances were up and down, but now you're talking about a defensive line that's minus those 5 guys. You're talking about an offensive line minus the 3 guys that I just mentioned. So from a quality perspective and a depth perspective, this is an absolute rebuild right now for UCLA. Chesney is able to bring over potentially 30 guys from James Madison in the way Cignetti did just 20 months ago, guys that are going to need to elevate in their game, of course, being in the Power Four, but guys that A, have played together, have that chemistry, and then B, have the experience of playing big-time college football, albeit at a lower level. And so you can bring in that infusion of talent and that depth right away and be in a position where you're competitive in 2026 while you're building out your recruiting class, while you're building out your philosophy, while you're building out the things that you really want to do in 2027 and beyond. So for all of these reasons, I think Chesney would be an absolute home run hire, and it really feels like this is the work of this selection committee. And there's a sophistication in looking out to Chesney that I think shows the Peters of the world, the Myers of the world, and Wasserman and Kendricks are really looking at this holistically. They're really looking at this sophisticatedly. They're really looking at this outside the box. So I think, have to be really excited as Bruin fans with Chesney moving forward. Having said that, I think there's 2 things to look out for. One is, particularly this week, as Will and I talk about it more, I think the big, shiny head coaching candidate for UCLA remains Jedd Fisch. But I think the challenge with Jedd Fisch, and I think there's a big gap between Jedd Fisch and everybody else who we were talking about the last few weeks and the last few months. I love Chesney for all the reasons that I described. I think the challenge with Jedd Fisch is going to be he is a flight risk, and he is someone who is a career hopper. He only stayed at Arizona for 3 years. He's only at Washington in year 2. We're already talking about all this noise about where he could potentially go. You get the sense that he has an eye on the NFL at some point. So even if Fisch was able to come in and turn things around relatively quickly, perhaps even bring a DeMond Williams over to UCLA, how long is he going to stay? And how likely is it that UCLA is going to be in this position 24 months from now, 36 months from now, where they got to reset the board again? So I think that's the knock right now on Fisch. And I think the committee is a little bit concerned about that, because considering where we are as a program, the state of mediocrity that UCLA football has been over the last 25 years, I think what you're really looking for right now is continuity and consistency and being able to build a more longer-term stable program in the ilk of what Terry Donahue was able to do and be at UCLA for 20 years. I think that's number one. Number 2 with Fisch is you got to keep your eye out on what's going on in the larger part of college football. So many job openings, big-time job openings. I mean, you're talking about LSU, you're talking about Florida, you're talking about Penn State. Look, James Franklin just took the Virginia Tech job. So Virginia Tech and James Franklin is off the board, but you got a ton of other big jobs. I think the Florida State job is going to open. I think the Auburn job is going to open. So you're talking about bigger and bigger jobs, big-time jobs in number that are really going to be growing. And so where does Fisch fit into that? I think everyone's got their eye right now on Lane Kiffin. A lot of noise that he's going to leave Ole Miss for either LSU or Florida. There's a sense that he's deciding. There's been talks about his family, being sort of whisked in private jets to both Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as well as Gainesville, Florida. Why is that significant from a UCLA fan perspective? Well, guess what? Both LSU and Florida seem like they want Lane Kiffin. If LSU is the team that ultimately gets Lane Kiffin, you got to believe Florida is going to be even more interested in Jedd Fisch, given that Jedd Fisch was an alum of Florida, and the famous story of Jedd Fisch really starting his career as a graduate assistant, leaving notes for over 400 consecutive days to the legendary Steve Spurrier, and starting as a GA with the Gators in the 90s. You got to believe that the Gators are really going to dial it up on Jedd Fisch, and Jedd Fisch is going to be really interested being an alum of the Gators. So that's one thing to watch for. The other element to watch for specifically with Chesney is he's a Pennsylvania native, and he started his career at these smaller Pennsylvania schools. He's primarily been kind of a Northeast guy. And so the fact of the matter remains, the Penn State job is open, and you have to believe a guy that grew up in the Northeast, grew up in Pennsylvania, loving football, and even kind of loving his style and his approach. If Penn State wasn't his dream job, you got to believe it was way up there in terms of a desirable job for him growing up. So UCLA is going to really be battling here potentially with Penn State over Chesney as well as some other candidates. There was a lot of talk earlier about Matt Rule potentially going to Penn State. He has since signed a pretty massive extension with Nebraska. So you wonder right now where Penn State's head is at. Chesney fits a lot of the boxes that Penn State is looking for, but maybe he's not a big enough name per se for a team that's been in the college football playoff, a team that's had so many double-digit wins over the last 10 years. Maybe they want to get someone splashier. But if you look at kind of alignment, cultural alignment, what he wants to do, how he wants to play, lines up very nicely with Penn State. So those are going to be the two things to watch for. Where does sort of Fisch land in this coaching carousel, and what's Penn State's thinking? They've been pretty quiet around Chesney as well as some other candidates. But folks, wanted to get on here, really talk about this coaching search. Thriller and I are going to be on later this week talking about basketball. We're going to sort of recap the first 5 games of the season, where we think this team is right now, where they need to go, and then got you all covered for the preview with Washington. And so before I get out of here, got to pay the bills. You see the Sleeper app, #1 sports app in the world today. Live chat, real-time conversations, real-time feeds, everything that you want. $100 off match bonus. You put in $100, you get $100 for free to play with. The $100 becomes $200, and you can make some choices, some over-unders on all of your UCLA football needs. Moving forward, are Bruins going to cross 200 yards passing against Washington? Are they going to cross 150 yards rushing? Is Nico going to play against Washington? All of these things you can determine on Sleeper app, the #1 sports app today. Use that promo code UCLA LAFB and tell them the guys at the LAFB network sent you. Well, folks, a great one here in the books. I'll be on again with the Thrill in about 24 hours, covering all of these great topics. As always, as we embark on a new era of UCLA college football, as we start embarking on the Big Ten season in UCLA basketball, how about those Lady Bruins in UCLA women's basketball? What an epic weekend they had. I think it's kind of highway robbery that they're still #3 in the country. That looks like the #1 team in the country, folks. I think we're headed for a national championship with the Lady Bruins this year. And as always, be loud, be proud, be passionate, Bruins. And like I always say, 4 is up forever, baby.